We came in place of our mum. Poor Triplets starts sewing at the Billionaire CEO's factory. But when he discovers the truth, he's moved. The alarm clock blared at 5 in the morning. Laura reached out to silence it, but today the movement was different. Slower, more painful. Her forehead burned. Her limbs felt heavy. Fever. "Not today," she murmured, closing her eyes tightly. In the small 2-bedroom house, Laura tried to get up. The world spun, and she fell back onto the pillow. The factory wouldn't wait. Mr. Smith, the morning shift supervisor, had been clear last week. Anyone absent without a doctor's note would be fired. Laura couldn't afford to lose this job. "Mommy?" Grace's voice came from the bedroom doorway. The 6-year-old stood there, her tangled brown hair framing her small face. "Good morning, my love," Laura said, trying to sound normal. "It's still early. Go back to sleep." Grace didn't move. She approached the bed and touched her mother's forehead. "You're hot," she said, with the direct clarity of children. Laura smiled weakly. "It's just a little fever, nothing serious." "Aren't you going to work?" The simple question carried all the weight of the world. The girl was only 6, but she understood. Children always understand more than adults imagine. "Yes, I am," Laura replied, forcing herself to sit up. "I just need to take some medicine." Grace nodded. Too serious for her age. "I'll wake Lily and Ella." "No need, sweetheart." But Grace had already left the room, her determined footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. Laura closed her eyes for a moment. The house was old and modest, in a distant working-class neighborhood where rent was cheaper. The furniture was used, the walls needed painting, but it was clean, it was home. With effort, she walked to the bathroom. In the cracked mirror, she saw her reflection, deep, dark circles under her eyes, a pale face. She swallowed a pill with tap water. When she returned to the bedroom, 3 pairs of identical eyes watched her from the doorway. Lily, Grace, and Ella. Her triplets. 6 years of joy and unconditional love. They stood in line. Lily, the tallest, Grace, in the middle, and Ella, the smallest by just an inch, all with the same worried look. "Mommy's sick," Grace told her sisters. "I'm fine," Laura insisted, but a wave of dizziness made her sit down. "You need to lie down." Lily, always the most practical, stated. Laura smiled. Despite everything. "Sometimes adults have to do things even when they're sick." "Why?" asked Ella, the quietest and most observant of the 3. Laura hesitated. How to explain that missing work meant no money for rent? That without a job there would be no way to pay for their school, nor food nor Lily's asthma medication? "Because I have responsibilities," she answered simply. The girls exchanged glances, communicating silently through a code only they understood. Laura stood up with determination. "Let's get ready. You have school today." The girls didn't move. "If you miss, will you lose your job?" Grace asked, direct as always. Laura froze. Children shouldn't have to worry about this. She had always tried to shield them from these realities. I can't miss today," she finally admitted. Laura went to the wardrobe and took out her uniform, grey pants and a shirt with the factory logo embroidered on the pocket. Her hands trembled as she tried to button her shirt. "Let me help you," Grace offered, picking up the buttons with her small but agile fingers. Laura allowed it, observing the concentration on her daughter's face. Meanwhile, she saw Lily and Ella whispering in the mirror. She knew that look. They were plotting something. "What are you two talking about over there?" "Nothing, Mommy," Ella replied quickly. In the small kitchen, Laura prepared buttered toast and chocolate milk. Her stomach churned, but she needed to maintain normalcy. The girls ate in silence and watching her with attentive eyes. "Aren't you going to eat?" Ella asked. "I'm not hungry right now, sweetheart." More glances were exchanged among the triplets. At 6:10, Laura was ready to leave. The fever hadn't broken. She took her factory ID badge from the small dresser near the door and put it in her pocket. "Be good for Mrs. Jenkins," she instructed, hugging each of her daughters. "I'll try to leave early today." "Do you promise to rest?" Lily asked. "I promise," Laura replied, knowing it was an impossible promise. She kissed all 3 and left, feeling the cool morning air on her hot face. The bus stop was 2 blocks away, and every step was an effort. As she turned the corner and saw that the bus was already at the stop, Laura tried to run. It was a mistake. The world spun and she had to lean on a tree. By the time she regained her balance, the bus had already left. No, no, no. The next bus would arrive in 20 minutes. It would be impossible to arrive on time. Laura felt tears of frustration. She couldn't lose this job, not with 3 children depending on her, not with the rent overdue and utility bills piling up. That's when she noticed. Her pocket felt lighter. The ID badge wasn't there. She searched frantically in all her pockets. In her small bag, nothing. It must have fallen out. Without her ID badge, she wouldn't even be able to enter the factory. Back at the house, Lily held her mother's ID badge in her small hands. It had been easy to slip it out of her pocket while hugging her goodbye. She felt bad about it, but the idea seemed right when they discussed it while their mother was in the bathroom. She'll get really sick if she goes to work, Lily had argued. But she needs the job, Grace reminded. That's when Ella suggested, what if we go in her place? The idea seemed absurd at first. They were just children. But the more they thought about it, the more possible it seemed. They knew the factory. They had been there twice before, when school was closed and Laura had no one to leave them with. How will we get in? Grace asked. With her ID badge, Lily replied. Now, with the ID badge in hand and their mother gone, they needed to act fast. She'll come back when she realizes she lost her badge, Grace said. Then we have to go now, Lily decided. They quickly got dressed. Jeans, t-shirts and sneakers. Ella grabbed her school backpack and put in crackers, a water bottle, and their mother's old emergency phone. Do you remember Mrs. Jenkins's number? Grace asked Lily. I do, Lily confirmed. The 3 gathered at the door, hesitant. What if we can't do it? Ella asked, unsure. We have to try, Lily replied. For Mommy. Grace nodded. For Mommy. They left, closing the door carefully. The spare key was hidden in a plant pot, and Grace picked it up. The bus stop was empty when they arrived. The next bus to the industrial district would arrive in 10 minutes. They sat down. 3 small girls with overly serious expressions. Remember the plan, Lily said in a low voice. We get in with the ID badge, stay quiet, and try to do Mommy's work. How will we know what her job is? Ella asked. We'll watch the other people, Grace suggested. Shout like we do when we're learning something new. When the bus arrived, the driver looked at them with curiosity. Alone, girls? He asked, as Lily handed him the bus fare. Our mom is waiting for us at the next stop, Grace lied. The driver seemed to accept the explanation. The bus was almost empty, with only a few sleepy workers. No one paid much attention to the 3 identical girls. 20 minutes later, the bus stopped in front of the industrial complex. The girls got off, looking up at the enormous grey building, the factory where their mother had worked for 4 years. Several workers walked briskly, swiping their ID badges at the electronic reader. The girls blended into the crowd. When they reached the reader, Lily held out the ID badge, standing on her tiptoes. The security guard looked down, confused. What are you doing here, girls? Lily froze. They hadn't planned what to say. It was Grace who answered. Our mom is sick. We came to bring her ID badge to a friend. The security guard frowned. And who is this friend? Mrs. Davies, Ella replied, remembering the name they sometimes heard their mother mention. The man seemed undecided, but the line behind them grew and people began to complain. All right, he finally said, but go straight to her and don't wander around. They passed through the gate, barely believing they had made it. The factory interior was a different world. Noisy, hot, full of machines. Rows of women sat in front of sewing machines, colorful fabrics passing through their nimble hands, the smell of new fabric mixed with machine oil. How will we find Mommy's spot? Ella whispered. Lily looked around. I think it was in Sector C. Remember the blue sign? They walked cautiously between the rows. Most workers were too focused to notice 3 little girls sneaking around. Finally, they found Sector C. Lily recognized her mother's workstation by the small flower sticker on the side of the machine. It's here, she whispered to her sisters. The station was empty, with fabrics piled up and the machine silent. Beside it, A woman sewed quickly. "What do we do now?" Grace asked. Lily looked at the pile of fabrics, at the machine, at the semi-finished pieces. She had seen her mother sew at home. It didn't seem that difficult. "Let's try to do what Mommy does," she decided. She climbed onto the chair, with Grace and Ella by her side. The machine seemed much larger up close. Lily picked up a piece of fabric, placed it under the needle, and hesitantly stepped on the pedal. The machine whirred, startling her. The fabric slid uncontrollably and the thread tangled. "That's not how you do it," said the woman next to them, noticing them. Her eyes widened. "What are you doing here?" The three froze. "Our mum is sick, we came in her place." The woman looked at them with astonishment and understanding. "You're Laura's daughters," she said. "The triplets. She always shows pictures of you." They nodded, relieved to find someone who knew their mother. "I'm Sophia," the woman introduced herself. "I've worked next to your mum for 2 years. She looked around nervously. "You can't stay here if the supervisor sees you." "Please," Lily begged. "If Mommy misses today, she'll get into trouble. She's really sick." Sophia sighed, looking at the three girls with their determined eyes. "You cannot operate the machines," she said firmly. "It's dangerous." The girls lowered their heads. "But," Sophia continued, "you can stay under the table, quietly. I'll say Laura went to the restroom if anyone asks." The three faces lit up. "Thank you," Lily said. "You're brave," Sophia replied. "Like your mother." The hours passed slowly. Sometimes, when no one was around, Sophia allowed them to help with small tasks, cutting loose threads, organizing scraps, attaching stickers to labels. Around 10 in the morning, they heard a commotion, raised voices, hurried footsteps. "Mr. Harrison is at the factory," someone whispered. "The CEO?" another voice asked in surprise. The girls were trying to help Sophia when they heard a deep voice behind them. "What's going on here?" They turned around, startled. A tall man in a dark suit with graying hair looked at them, his blue eyes wide with surprise. Beside him, a shorter man looked horrified. "Mr. Harrison," the bald man stammered. "I didn't know." Sophia stood up, pale. "Sir, I can explain." But Mr. Harrison couldn't take his eyes off the three identical girls. Lily stepped forward, placing herself in front of her sisters. "It was our idea," she said with a firm voice despite her fear. "Mommy doesn't know we're here." Mr. Harrison knelt down, getting to their level. "And who is your mother?" "Laura Smith," Grace replied, showing him the ID badge. "She works here." "She's sick today," Ella added, "with a very high fever." "And you came to work in her place?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice mixing astonishment with something else. "We came in place of our mommy," Grace confirmed. "She's sick. She can't lose her job." A strange silence followed. Mr. Harrison continued to look at them as if he saw something beyond the three small girls. His face, which had previously seemed severe, softened in a surprising way. "How old are you?" he finally asked. "6, us," they answered together. "And you came all the way here by yourselves?" They nodded. "We took the bus," Lily explained, "just like Mommy does every day." It was then that something changed in Mr. Harrison, something profound, as if an invisible wall had crumbled within him. He swallowed hard, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. "No one should be so afraid of losing their job that their children have to do this." He stood up. "How long have you known their mother?" he asked Sophia. 4 years, Kisa," she replied. "She's an excellent employee, never misses work, always puts in extra hours. The girls are everything to her." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, returning his gaze to the triplets. "Do you know your home address, where your mother is now?" "Yes," Lily replied cautiously. "Why?" "Because I'm taking you home," he said, surprising everyone. "And I'm going to check on your mother." The girls looked at each other, unsure. "Are we not going to be in trouble?" Ella asked, her voice trembling. Marcus Harrison, the man who managed the factory from afar, through reports and numbers, smiled slightly. "No," he assured them. "No one is going to be in trouble today." Then, to everyone's astonishment, he extended a hand to the girls. "Shall we go? Your mother must be worried." After a moment of hesitation, Ella was the first to take the offered hand. Grace and Lily soon followed, each holding onto a side of the man's coat. And so, the CEO of the factory walked out through the main corridor, accompanied by 3 identical little girls, under the astonished gaze of all the employees. Something had changed in that moment, not just for Marcus Harrison, but for the entire factory. And no one realized it more clearly than the triplets, who, with their childlike courage, had just broken a barrier they didn't even know existed. Marcus Harrison's shiny black car looked absurdly out of place on the narrow street of the working-class neighborhood. Children playing on the sidewalk stopped to stare when he parked. The triplets got out first, eager to get home. "It's right there, Mr. Harrison." Lily pointed to a small 2-story building with peeling paint. On the 2nd floor, Marcus followed the girls, observing everything around him. The streets weren't dirty, but they had that air of a place where things were repaired rather than replaced. Windows with makeshift curtains, plants in repurposed paint cans, toys worn by use and time. The staircase leading to the 2nd floor creaked under his steps. In the hallway, Grace ran ahead and retrieved a key hidden in a sun-faded artificial plant pot. "Mummy must be sleeping," Ella whispered, as Grace carefully opened the door. The apartment was small, but surprisingly bright. Large windows let in the midday light, illuminating a space that Marcus immediately realized was kept with extreme care despite its simplicity. White walls, a worn sofa covered by a colorful patchwork quilt, a wooden table with 4 mismatched chairs. Everything was meticulously clean. There was no luxury, but there was order. "Mommy!" Grace called, heading down the narrow hallway that presumably led to the bedrooms. Hurried footsteps, and then Laura appeared, her eyes wide with panic. Her face was pale, but flushed red from fever. She wore a worn bathrobe over simple pajamas. "Mr. Harrison," she murmured, confused, one hand instinctively pulling her bathrobe tighter, the other leaning on the wall for balance. "Mr. Harrison," she murmured, confused, one hand instinctively pulling her bathrobe tighter, the other leaning on the wall for balance. "Mrs. Smith," he replied with a slight nod. "I found your daughters at the factory." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to process the information. When she opened them again, there was a mix of shame and fear. "At the factory," she repeated, looking at the triplets, who now seemed to realize the gravity of what they had done. "They were trying to work your sewing machine," Marcus explained, keeping his voice neutral. Laura put a hand to her mouth. They didn't." She swayed slightly, and Marcus instinctively stepped forward, but Lily was already by her mother's side, holding her arm. "It was our idea, Mommy," Lily said quickly. "We took your ID badge when you weren't looking." "You were very sick," Grace added. "We wanted to help." "We didn't want you to lose your job," Ella finished, her small voice laden with worry. Laura looked at her daughters, then at Marcus, and the CEO could clearly see the moment she understood everything. Her face showed a sequence of emotions: shock, then pride mixed with despair, and finally fear. A fear so pure and deep that Marcus felt something constrict within him. "Mr. Harrison, Laura began, but dizziness made her lean more heavily on the wall. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to apologize for this. They're just children. They don't understand." "Mommy, you need to lie down," Lily interrupted, firm as a little nurse. "You still have a fever." Marcus watched as the 3 girls guided their mother back to the bedroom, moving with a coordination that came from much practice in caring for each other. He stood in the living room, feeling simultaneously an intruder and a privileged observer of something rarely seen. His eyes scanned the room again, noticing details he hadn't perceived before. A small improvised altar on a shelf, with a photo of the newborn triplets and a candle. Children's drawings carefully affixed to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. A sewing basket in the corner, full of scraps and threads, evidence of the extra work Laura probably did on weekends. On a side table, he saw bills organized in small piles. Even from a distance, he could see the red final notice stamps on some of them. Lily returned to the living room after a few minutes. "Mommy wants to talk to you," she said, seriously. "But she's very embarrassed." Marcus nodded and followed the girl down the narrow hallway. Laura's bedroom was tiny, little more than a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a bedside table. On the wall, more of her daughter's drawings, forming a kind of makeshift, colorful wallpaper. Laura was sitting on the bed, her back supported by pillows. She had tried to tidy her hair and pulled the blanket up to her waist in an attempt to appear more presentable. Her face was still feverish, but her eyes were more alert now. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice trembling. "I have no words to apologize for what the girls did. I never imagined they would." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I lost my ID badge on the way to the factory and came back to look for it. When I got home and couldn't find them, I was desperate. I called the neighbor, the school. I was about to call the police." Marcus remained silent, listening. The room was so small that he had to bend slightly to avoid hitting his head on the sloped ceiling. "I understand that what happened is serious," Laura continued, words tumbling out quickly. "I know rules were broken, but please, Mr. Harrison, the girls are just children. They were just trying to help. If anyone should be punished, it's me. I can work overtime, work weekends, anything." Her voice trailed off. Marcus finally spoke. "Mrs. Smith, no one will be punished." Laura blinked as if disbelieving what she was hearing. "Your daughters showed extraordinary courage and loyalty," he continued, "and they raised important questions about how we treat our employees." He saw the relief in her eyes, but also distrust. People like Laura, he realized, were not used to receiving compassion from the system. "Rest and recover," Marcus said, his voice gentler than usual. "Your job is safe. Take as much time as you need." The tears Laura had been holding back began to fall. "Thank you," she whispered, "but I can't be long without working. The bills." Marcus hesitated only for a second. "You will receive your salary normally during your recovery." The shock on her face was almost painful to see, as if the simple idea of fairness was incomprehensible. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could hold it back. Marcus didn't have a simple answer. How to explain what he felt seeing 3 small children trying to operate an industrial sewing machine. How to articulate the shame that hit him when he realized he had never truly thought about the people who manufactured the products that enriched his company. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. When he returned to the living room, he found the triplets sitting in a row on the sofa, waiting for the verdict like little defendants in a courtroom. Their identical faces turned to him simultaneously, big eyes filled with expectation and fear. "Your mother will be fine," he said, "and no one is in trouble." The 3 girls, shoulders visibly relaxed. "Will she be able to rest?" Grace asked. "Yes," Marcus confirmed, "for as long as she needs." "And she won't lose her job?" Lily insisted. "No," he assured them. "Her job is secure." Ella, the quietest, looked at him with her piercing eyes. "Promise." Marcus felt the weight of that simple word. A promise to a child was not a trivial thing. It was absolute, sacred. "I promise," he replied, with a seriousness that surprised even himself. The 3 smiled, and Marcus saw in those identical smiles a trust he didn't deserve, but one he was somehow determined to honor. Before leaving, he went to the kitchen and discreetly left some cash on the counter. Not as charity, he thought, but as an advance for the work Laura would do once she recovered. As he closed the apartment door, Marcus Harrison felt something strange and uncomfortable in his chest, a sensation he couldn't immediately name, but one that stayed with him as he descended the creaking stairs, got into his luxurious car, and drove back to the world he was accustomed to. It was unease, a profound discomfort he could no longer ignore. In the rearview mirror, he saw the building receding, one of dozens of similar ones, housing hundreds of stories like Laura's and her daughter's. Stories he had never considered important. Something was changing inside him. A certainty grew, uncomfortable but inevitable. He could no longer run his company the same way. Not after today. Not after truly seeing the people behind the numbers on his spreadsheets. Marcus Harrison, the CEO who had never cared about anything beyond results, felt his heart restless for the first time in a long while, and he knew, with a disturbing clarity, that nothing would ever be the same. Marcus Harrison walked into his office at company headquarters the next morning, with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: discomfort. The glass walls, the minimalist and expensive furniture, the almost reverential silence. Everything now seemed strangely artificial after his visit to Laura Smith's home. His assistant, Sophia, had already organized his day's schedule and left a cup of coffee exactly as he liked it on his desk. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she greeted him with professional efficiency. "The executive committee is waiting in the meeting room for the quarterly report, and Mr. Thompson has called 3 times since yesterday." "It seems urgent." Marcus nodded distractedly, his thoughts still on the creaking staircase of Laura's building, the bills with red notices, the determined eyes of the triplets. "Sophia," he said suddenly, "I want you to bring me all human resources reports from the factory. Attendance records, employee turnover, complaints, everything. From the last 2 years," Sophia blinked, surprised. In 6 years of working as Marcus's assistant, he had never asked for these reports. "And cancel the meeting with the executive committee," he added. "Tell them we have a more urgent matter to discuss and reschedule for tomorrow." "Yes, sir," Sophia replied, clearly intrigued by the change in behavior. "Anything else?" "Yes. Contact the legal department. I want a complete review of our policies on sick leave, authorized absences, and overtime compensation." 2 hours later, Marcus's office was covered in folders, reports, and charts. He had removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and was now running his hands through his graying hair, an expression of disbelief growing on his face. The numbers told a story that he, deliberately or not, had never seen. Turnover at the factory was almost 40% per year. Employees rarely stayed more than 3 years, except for supervisors like Thompson. Reasons for termination were almost always the same: absenteeism, low productivity, or simply not fitting the company culture. An internal memo from the Human Resources Department, dated 2 years ago, caught his eye. "We recommend implementing additional breaks during the 8-hour shift to reduce repetitive strain injuries and improve long-term productivity." In the margin of the document, a handwritten note by Thompson: "Denied. Negative impact on daily production." Another report showed health-related absence statistics: back pain, joint problems, carpal tunnel syndrome, stress. The numbers were alarming, well above the industry average. "Mr. Harrison," Sophia was at the door with another stack of documents. "The legal department sent what you asked for, and Mr. Thompson is here. He insists on speaking with you." Marcus took a deep breath. "Ask him to wait 10 more minutes." When she left, he picked up a specific report: Laura Smith's history. 4 years with the company, always in the same position. Performance reviews consistently positive. Dedicated employee, meticulous, meets all targets. Salary, the minimum for her category, with only a small adjustment in 4 years. Requests for time off, 7 in the last 2 years, 5 denied. Most common reason, dependent illness, her daughter's. Marcus slowly closed the folder. Laura was not an exception, as she was the standard. A irreplaceable cog in a system designed to extract as much as possible for the minimum necessary. A system he had built. Thompson entered without waiting to be called, his face red with barely contained indignation. "Mr. Harrison, we need to discuss yesterday's incident," he began, adjusting the tight tie around his stout neck. "Those children violated several safety regulations and company policies. Employee Smith should be held responsible for—" "Sit down, Thompson," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but firm. The supervisor obeyed, uncomfortable with the piles of reports scattered around the room. "Do you personally know Laura Smith?" Marcus asked. Thompson blinked, confused by the question. "Well, I know all the employees in my sector, of course. She's a seamstress in Sector C for 4 years. And what else do you know about her? She's competent, meets targets, but she has a problem with absences. She's received warnings for it." "Absences to care for her sick daughters," Marcus corrected, opening Laura's folder again. "Just 6-year-old triplets she raises alone." Thompson looked away, uncomfortable. "Rules are for everyone, Mr. Harrison. We can't make exceptions based on personal situations. Productivity would suffer." Marcus pushed aside the documents in front of him and leaned closer to Thompson. "Did you know we have a 40% turnover rate? Do you know how much it costs to constantly replace and train new employees? It's industry standard, sir. Textile factories have always had high turnover. And you think that's good for business? Marcus asked, his voice hardening. Losing experienced employees like Laura Smith because we can't offer 3 days off when she's sick? Thompson started to reply, but Marcus raised his hand, silencing him. I am reviewing all our human resources policies, he announced. Starting today, we will implement a new system of authorized absences, regular breaks during shifts, and an employee benefits program for those with more than 1 year of service. Thompson's face paled. Mr. Harrison, this will have a significant impact on operational costs. The shareholders will receive sustainable long-term returns, Marcus cut in, not inflated profits at the expense of our employees. Health. Thompson looked genuinely confused. For years, Marcus Harrison had been the relentless advocate of efficiency above all else. This sudden shift in perspective was incomprehensible to him. What happened yesterday? He finally asked. Why are you changing everything because of one employee? Marcus looked out his office window, which offered a panoramic view of the city. Somewhere out there, in an apartment too small for a family of 4, Laura Smith was probably still in bed, worried about the bills she couldn't pay if she lost her job. It's not because of one employee, Marcus replied, turning his gaze back to Thompson. It's because I finally saw what we built, and I don't like what I saw. At 2 in the afternoon, the main conference room was full. The directors of each department sat around the large mahogany table, exchanging confused glances. They were rarely summoned with such urgency. Marcus entered last, carrying a folder. Without preliminaries, he went straight to the point. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will implement significant changes to our operational policies, he announced, his voice clear and decisive. Our current model is unsustainable from both a human and business perspective. A murmur ran through the room. Charles Davis, the finance director, was the first to speak. Marcus, what are these changes? We haven't received any preparatory memo, no impact analysis. Because there was no time for bureaucracy, Marcus replied, distributing copies of a document. This is the new operational code of conduct that goes into effect today. The directors flipped through the document with expressions ranging from surprise to alarm. This is radical, commented Mary White, production director. 15-minute breaks every 2 hours, paid sick leave, flexibility for family emergencies. Marcus, this will reduce our production by at least 15%. In the short term, yes, Marcus agreed. In the long term, it will reduce our turnover, decrease health-related absences, and improve product quality. Theory, Davis retorted. In practice, our competitors will continue operating under the old standards and leave us behind. Marcus smiled slightly. And then we will be the first to change those standards. And I believe the market and consumers will eventually recognize that. The shareholders won't like it, Davis warned. The board might call for your head over this. Let them, Marcus replied with a calm that surprised even himself. But first, I'll show them the numbers I saw today. The long-term sustainability of our current model is an illusion, gentlemen. We are extracting value from our employees as if they were non-renewable resources, and that ends now. Mary White studied Marcus with curiosity. What happened, Marcus? Why this sudden change? Marcus hesitated. How to explain the transformation brought about by 3 small girls trying to operate a sewing machine? How to describe the impact of seeing Laura Smith's home with its improvised altar and bills with disconnection notices? Let's just say I finally saw our company from the correct perspective, he replied. From the factory floor, not the top floor of the corporate building. Davis shook his head, skeptical. This is sentimentalism, Marcus. Business is numbers. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, harder than he intended. The sound echoed through the room, silencing everyone. No, Charles. Business is people. And for too long we've treated our people as numbers. He opened his folder and pulled out a series of photos. They were images of the factory, taken without the employees realizing. Tired faces, uncomfortable postures, expressions of disguised pain. Do any of you know these faces? Has any of you spent more than an hour on the factory floor, spoken with the operators? Asked about their lives. The silence was his answer. We thought we were efficient because we optimized processes, Marcus continued. But what we actually did was normalize human exhaustion and call it efficiency. He stood up, looking each of the directors in the eye. We will no longer treat exhaustion as efficiency. From today, the well-being of our employees is as important as the numbers at the end of the quarter. And I will not accept arguments to the contrary. The room remained silent for several seconds. Finally, to everyone's surprise, it was Mary White who spoke. I agree with Marcus, she said, closing her copy of the document. In fact, I've tried to implement some of these changes in the past, but she briefly looked at Davis. I always ran into budgetary restrictions. One by one, other directors began to nod. Not all of them, of course. Davis and a few others maintained skeptical expressions, but it was a start. At the end of the meeting, Marcus knew he had started something that he could no longer stop. The system would change, with or without everyone's approval. It was a risky gamble, one that could cost him his job. But as he walked back to his office, he realized he no longer cared about that. For the first time in many years, he felt he was doing something that truly mattered. On his desk, he found a message from Sophia. Company nurse called. Laura Smith is better but still has a fever. The triplets are with the neighbor. Marcus picked up the phone and dialed a number. Human Resources Department, this is Harrison. I want you to immediately implement a childcare assistance program for employees with children. And check if Laura Smith has already been registered to receive the long service bonus. As he hung up, Marcus looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, 3 identical girls waited for their mother to recover, unaware that their courageous actions had just changed not only their lives, but potentially the lives of hundreds of other workers. Thank you, Lily, Grace, and Ella, he murmured to himself. The system was beginning to change. Marcus Harrison knew nothing about children's toys. At 53, childless, and having spent most of his adult life in corporate offices, he had never needed to think about the subject. So standing in the central aisle of the toy store, he felt completely lost. Can I help you, sir? A smiling saleswoman asked. Yes, Marcus replied, relieved. I'm looking for dolls for 3 girls, sisters. Triplets, actually. How old are the girls? 6 years old. The saleswoman guided him through a section filled with all kinds of dolls, dolls that talked, that cried, that walked, that came with technological accessories and exorbitant prices. These are the most popular this season, she explained, showing a plastic doll with colorful hair and a shiny dress. They come with a mobile app and... No, Marcus interrupted, feeling that wasn't right. Something simpler, more real. The saleswoman seemed momentarily confused, but then smiled with understanding. I think I know what you're looking for. She led him to a less flashy section of the store, where cloth dolls with simple clothes and delicately embroidered faces were displayed. These are handcrafted, she explained. Each one is slightly different from the other. They are dolls for real play, not just for display. Marcus picked one up, feeling the soft texture of the fabric. It was simple, but there was something genuine about it. He chose 3, each with different colored hair and dresses. Would you like gift wrapping? The saleswoman asked when he headed to the checkout. Marcus hesitated. No, just a bag is fine. Leaving the store with the paper bag swinging in his hand, he felt strangely nervous. Would the girls like the gift? Was it not sophisticated enough? Would Laura misinterpret his gesture? This last question haunted him all the way to the working-class neighborhood. For the first time in decades, Marcus Harrison was concerned about the impression he would make, not as a CEO, but simply as a person. When he parked in front of Laura's building, he noticed that one of the windows now had a small flower box. It hadn't been there last time. A small sign of hope, perhaps. He climbed the creaking stairs, the paper bag firmly held in his hand. He was about to knock on the door when he heard children's laughter from the other side. The sound made him smile involuntarily. He knocked twice, gently. The laughter stopped, followed by hurried footsteps. The door opened, and 3 identical faces appeared, one above the other at different heights. Mr. Marcus, the triplets exclaimed almost in unison, their eyes lighting up with recognition. "Hello, girls," he replied, still not entirely accustomed to the warm reception. "Mommy," Grace called, turning into the apartment. "It's Mr. Marcus." Laura appeared from the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her face was flushed, but now with health, not fever. She wore simple jeans and a light blue top, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mr. Marcus," she said simply, with a shy smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he replied, feeling strangely formal. "I was passing by and thought I'd see how you all were." It was an obvious lie. No one like Marcus Harrison passed by that neighborhood by chance. Laura seemed to notice, but her smile only widened. "You're not bothering us," she assured him. "Please, come in." The girls stepped back to let him pass, watching him with clear curiosity, especially the bag in his hand. The apartment was different, the same walls, the same simple furniture, but there was something new in the air. Flowers in a makeshift vase on the table, the smell of something baking in the oven, a lightness that hadn't been present during his first visit. "You're looking better," Marcus observed, looking at Laura. "I am," she confirmed. "Thanks to your generosity, being able to stay home to recover made all the difference. The changes at the factory too," Marcus added, referring to the new policies he had implemented. "It wasn't just for you. It was necessary." Laura nodded, a look of understanding passing between them. She had returned to work a week ago, and like all employees, had noticed the immediate changes: regular breaks, an improved cafeteria, less aggressive supervisors. "It's hard to believe," she said softly. "For me too," Marcus admitted, and both chuckled slightly. The triplets, who had observed this interaction with interest, now stared intently at the bag Marcus still held. "What's in the bag, Mr. Marcus?" Lily finally asked, the most direct of the three. Marcus feigned surprise. "In the bag? Let me see." He opened the bag and looked inside. "Looks like I have something here for 3 very brave girls I know." The 3 girls' eyes widened. "For us?" Grace asked, incredulous. "If your names are Lily, Grace, and Ella, then yes, it's for you," Marcus replied, trying to maintain a serious tone, but failing as a smile appeared on his face. He pulled the 3 cloth dolls from the bag, handing the pink-dressed one to Lily, the blue-dressed one to Grace, and the green-dressed one to Ella. There was a moment of absolute silence as the girls looked at the dolls in their hands. Marcus felt a pang of insecurity. Maybe he had made a mistake. Maybe they were too sophisticated for such simple dolls. Then Ella, the quietest of the 3, hugged her doll to her chest and looked up at Marcus with shining eyes. "She's perfect," she whispered. In seconds, the other 2 followed suit, hugging their dolls and thanking him enthusiastically. Marcus watched, relieved and touched by their genuine reaction. Laura, who was watching the scene leaning against the kitchen doorway, had an expression that was hard to read, gratitude mixed with something more complex. "You didn't have to," she said softly when Marcus looked her way. "I wanted to," he replied simply. "Are you staying for dinner, Mr. Marcus?" Lily asked, still hugging her doll. Marcus hesitated, looking at Laura. He didn't want to impose his presence. "Mr. Marcus must have other engagements, dear," Laura began. "Actually," Marcus interrupted, surprising himself, "I don't have any engagements today." Laura seemed momentarily speechless, but then she smiled. "Well, we're having lasagna. Nothing fancy, but there's enough for everyone if you'd like to join us." "I'd love to," Marcus replied, realizing it was true. And so, the CEO of one of the country's largest clothing factories found himself sitting at the small table in a modest kitchen, eating homemade lasagna with a seamstress and her 3 daughters. The conversation flowed with surprising naturalness. The girls talked about school, about their favorite books, about how they had helped take care of their mother during her recovery. Marcus, in turn, found himself sharing stories from his own childhood, something he rarely did. He spoke about growing up on a farm in the countryside before moving to the city, about his first job delivering newspapers, about how he always wanted a dog but never had one. "You can have one now," Grace observed, with the simple logic of children. "You're an adult," Marcus laughed. "I suppose so, but I live alone and work a lot." "It wouldn't be fair to the dog. Don't you have family?" Ella asked, her voice small but direct. A brief silence followed the question. Laura seemed about to reprimand her daughter for the indiscretion, but Marcus replied first. "No, I don't. My parents passed away many years ago. I never married. I have no children." "That's sad," Ella said sincerely. "Ella?" Laura exclaimed, embarrassed. "It's all right," Marcus assured her, surprisingly unfazed by the comment. "Sometimes I think it's sad too." Dinner continued, but that moment of honesty hung in the air, subtly changing the dynamic. They were no longer just an employer visiting an employee. They were two people, two lives, finding unexpected points of connection. When the meal ended, the girls asked to show Marcus their rooms, eager for him to see where their new dolls would sleep. Laura nodded, and Marcus found himself being guided down the small hallway to a cramped but cozy room with 3 small beds. "This is my bed," Lily explained, pointing to the one nearest the window. "And this is Grace's, and that's Ella's." The beds were simple, covered with colorful quilts that Marcus suspected Laura had made herself. On the walls, children's drawings created a cheerful and personal decor. "It's a very nice room," Marcus commented honestly. "Mommy made our quilts," Grace said proudly. "Some of she sews better than anyone." "I don't doubt it for a second," Marcus replied, thinking about how Laura's stitching was always praised at the factory. When they returned to the living room, Laura was clearing the dishes. Marcus offered to help, but she politely declined. "It's getting late," Laura said, looking at the clock. "Girls, bath time." The triplets protested automatically, but without much conviction. They were clearly tired, despite the excitement of the visit and the gifts. "I should go," Marcus said, taking the hint. "Thank you for dinner." "It was delicious." "Thank you for the dolls," Laura replied, accompanying him to the door while the girls reluctantly headed to the bathroom, still holding their dolls. At the door, there was a moment of hesitation. Marcus felt he should say something, but didn't quite know what. "It was a lovely evening," he finally said. Laura nodded. "It was. Maybe I could. Come back sometime?" The question slipped out before he could think better of it. Laura seemed surprised, but then she smiled. "The girls would like that, and so would I." Marcus descended the stairs with a strange, light feeling in his chest. Something had begun there that night, something different from anything he had ever known before. The following week, Marcus returned. This time he brought a bag of fresh fruit, apples, pears, grapes, and strawberries, which he knew were too expensive to be part of the girls' regular diet. He was greeted with the same joy, the triplets running to open the door before he even knocked. Laura, less surprised this time, had prepared tea. They sat in the living room, eating fruit and talking about the week. Laura spoke about the changes at the factory, how the atmosphere seemed lighter, how people smiled more. "Mrs. Davies even organized a group for us to have lunch together," she reported. "That never would have happened before." Marcus listened, satisfied. The changes were working, not just in the numbers, which were also improving, surprisingly, but in the spirit of the place. That night, before he left, Ella asked him to read them a story. Marcus, who hadn't read children's stories since his own childhood, found himself sitting on the edge of Ella's bed, with a fairy tale book in his hands and 3 pairs of attentive eyes fixed on him. His voice, normally used to lead meetings and dictate memos, now brought princesses, dragons, and sorcerers to life. The triplets listened, fascinated, and even Laura, standing at the bedroom door, smiled as she watched the scene. That second visit established a pattern. Every week, usually on Thursdays, Marcus would appear at Laura's apartment door. Sometimes he brought fruit, other times new books, or small luxuries he knew Laura rarely bought for herself: good tea, artisanal chocolates, a soft shawl when the weather began to cool. The visits weren't just about gifts, though. They were moments of connection, a pause in the fast pace of his executive life. There, in that small apartment, Marcus wasn't the feared CEO, the man whose decisions affected hundreds of lives. He was just Marcus, the man who read stories, who brought fruit, who laughed at the girls' jokes. At the beginning of the second month of these visits, the evening reading ritual had become firmly established. Marcus would read a chapter from a children's book, the girls would listen, and then Laura would put them to bed. Then, The adults would sit in the living room, drinking tea and talking in low voices. It was on one of those nights that Laura finally asked, "Why do you do this, Marcus?" He had noticed she had started using his first name recently, dropping the formal Mr. Harrison. He liked it. "Do what?" he asked, though he knew exactly what she was referring to. "Coming here, spending time with us. I'm sure you have more important things to do." Marcus considered the question, looking at the teacup in his hands. "I don't," he finally replied, surprising both of them with his honesty. "So in fact, this has become the most important part of my week." Laura studied him in silence, her eyes reflecting the soft lamplight. "The girls eagerly await your visits," she said. "They talk about you all the time." "And you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Laura smiled, a slight blush rising to her cheeks. "Me too." On a particularly rainy Thursday, Marcus arrived at the apartment drenched, having forgotten his umbrella at the office. Laura insisted he take off his wet jacket and hung it near the heater to dry. The girls found the sight of the always immaculate Mr. Marcus with dripping hair and a crumpled shirt hilarious. That night, when he finished reading the chapter from the book, Ella didn't rush under the covers as usual. Instead, she opened her bedside table drawer and pulled out a folded paper. "I made this for you," she said, handing the paper to Marcus. It was a crayon drawing. It showed 4 stick figures, 3 small with long hair, 1 larger with short hair, all holding hands. A large red heart surrounded the figures. At the top, in colorful, uneven letters, was written, "Our family." Marcus looked at the drawing, feeling something constrict in his chest. "It's you with us," Ella explained, pointing to the larger figure. Marcus couldn't answer immediately. A knot had formed in his throat. Did you like it?" Ella asked, worried by his silence. "I liked it very much," he finally managed to say. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Ella smiled, relieved, and threw herself into his arms for a quick hug before running to her bed. Later, when the girls were asleep and he was preparing to leave, Laura noticed the care with which he folded the drawing to put it in the inner pocket of his now dry jacket. "She'll be happy you liked it so much," she commented. "I'll put it on my desk," Marcus replied, "to remind me of what really matters." The next day, in his corporate office, Marcus kept his promise. Ella's drawing, now in a simple wooden frame, occupied a prominent place on his desk. When Sophia, his assistant, entered with the day's agenda, she immediately noticed the new item. "Nice drawing," she commented, curious. "It was a gift," Marcus replied, without elaborating. Throughout the day, executives and managers who entered his office for meetings also noticed the new addition. Some seemed confused, others curious, but no one dared to ask directly. For Marcus, however, the meaning was clear. That simple drawing, with its stick figures and red heart, represented everything that had changed in his life in recent weeks. It was a symbol of the transformation that began with 3 little girls sneaking into a factory, and which now spread like ripples, affecting not only his company, but his own view of what it meant to live a fulfilling life. Looking at the drawing during a break between meetings, Marcus realized he was smiling, the beginning of something different, indeed. Something he never imagined for himself, but that he now couldn't imagine living without. It was an autumn Sunday, the kind of day that seems suspended in time, with the sun creating golden patches through the leaves that were beginning to change color. Marcus had arrived earlier than usual, bringing ingredients for a lunch he had offered to prepare. The Thursday visits had expanded to weekend gatherings, when time allowed. In Laura's small living room, the triplets played with their dolls, the same ones Marcus had brought months ago, now a little worn from constant love. They had created an elaborate world for their daughters, with complex stories that only made sense in their childlike logic. Laura and Marcus were sitting on the tiny balcony, little more than a widened railing with space for 2 chairs. It was the place where they talked when they wanted a moment of tranquility, away from the curious ears of the girls. From there, they could see the neighborhood park where families enjoyed the good weather. "So they seem so happy," Marcus commented, observing the triplets through the half-open glass door, as if nothing in the world could disturb them. Laura smiled. That smile Marcus now knew well, full of love, but also with a shadow of worry that never completely disappeared. "Children have that ability," she replied, taking a sip of the tea she held in her hands, "to find joy even when everything around seems uncertain." There was something in the way she said it that made Marcus realize there was more to that observation than the superficial words indicated. In recent months, he had come to know many layers of Laura: her determination, her kindness, her surprisingly sharp humor. But there was always something reserved, a part of her that remained guarded. The question had formed in his mind weeks, perhaps months ago, but it had never seemed like the right time to ask it. Perhaps there would never be a perfect moment. "Laura," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I've never asked about the girl's father." He saw the immediate change in her face, a subtle tension in her shoulders, an almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. For a moment, Marcus regretted asking, but then Laura turned her eyes to her daughters playing in the living room, and something in her expression transformed. She took a deep breath, like someone preparing to dive into deep waters. "He was arrested," she finally said, her voice low but firm. "He was violent. He drank, yelled, hit." She paused, her eyes still fixed on the girls. "When I found out I was pregnant, I ran away." "He never knew the girls." Marcus nodded in silence, realizing the weight of those simple words, the complex and painful story they hid. "It was the hardest and easiest thing I've ever done," Laura continued, now looking at her own hands. "Hard because I was alone, scared, penniless. Easy because I knew I had no choice. Not after I knew there would be 3 babies growing inside me." A light breeze moved her hair, and Laura tucked it behind her ear in an automatic gesture. Marcus remained silent, giving her space to tell her story at her own pace. "I moved to another city, took temporary jobs, slept in shelters when I needed to. When the girls were born, a social worker helped me find a place to stay. Then came the job at the factory." She made a small gesture with her hand, as if summarizing 4 years of struggle in a simple movement. "And here we are." Marcus wanted to ask more, but something in her face stopped him. There was more, he could feel it. Laura looked at her daughters again, and her face softened with the love she felt, but then a shadow passed over her eyes. "But I'm afraid," she admitted, so low that Marcus had to lean in to hear, "that one day he'll find us." The confession hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. "Is he still in prison?" Marcus asked carefully. Laura shook her head. "He got out 2 years ago, served 5 of a 10-year sentence for aggravated assault against another woman, not me." She took another sip of tea, but Marcus suspected it was just to buy time. "I changed my last name, left the city where we met, but I'm afraid that one day, by chance or because he looked, he'll end up finding us." Marcus looked at the triplets. They had created a kind of play with their dolls and laughed with abandon. It was impossible to imagine that pure joy being threatened. "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night," Laura continued, her voice a little steadier now that she had started, "thinking I heard footsteps on the stairs, or I see a man in the street who looks like him, and my heart stops for a second. It's a fear that never fully sleeps." She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders, as if reminding herself of her own strength. "I don't let the girls notice, of course. They need to feel safe. I've never talked about him to them, just that we don't have a father in our family, and so far that's been enough." A particularly loud laugh from Lily made both of them look inside. The girls had put improvised hats on their dolls, transforming them into explorers of some imaginary jungle. "They are extraordinary," Marcus commented, genuinely admiring. "And like you," Laura smiled, a true smile this time. "They are my strength. Every time I think about giving up, I look at them and find the courage to continue." They sat in silence for a few moments, watching the girls play. Marcus felt the urge to say something, to offer solutions, protection, guarantees. It was his nature as an executive, to identify problems and solve them, but something stopped him. This was not a problem to be solved with resources or quick decisions. It was the complex reality of Laura's life. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" Marcus asked, surprised. "For not saying everything will be all right, for not promising to protect me, for just listening. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his directly. Most people immediately want to reassure me when I tell them this, as if my fear was something to be fixed, not respected. Marcus said nothing. He just looked at her with deep respect, finally understanding another layer of Laura Smith. She wasn't just the dedicated mother who worked hard, the kind woman who welcomed him into her home, the strong person who faced difficulties without complaining. She was also someone who lived with constant fear and, yet, managed to create a home full of joy for her daughters, living with courage and also with fear, and that made her even stronger. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a silence of mutual understanding, of a trust that had slowly grown over the months. Marcus realized that Laura hadn't shared that story with many people. He wasn't just a visitor in her home now, he was someone she trusted. "Mommy, Mr. Marcus," Grace called from the living room. "Shall I come see our play?" Laura smiled and stood up. "Duty calls," she said, a lightness returning to her voice. "We can't disappoint our audience." Marcus followed her inside, observing how she transitioned smoothly from serious conversation to the role of enthusiastic mother. It was a delicate balance she had perfected, carrying her burden without letting it crush everyday joy. Sitting on the small sofa side by side, they watched the Triplets' grand performance, a confusing story about explorers, hidden treasures, and a friendly dragon who was actually a transformed prince. During the performance, Marcus noticed that Laura's hand had found his in the space between them on the sofa, a light, almost casual touch. She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on her daughters, but her fingers intertwined with his in a gesture of silent trust. In that simple moment, Marcus understood that he had become part of something precious. Not just the Sunday afternoons and bedtime stories, but the fragile and valuable trust of a family who had learned to find joy while living with fear. And he promised himself, silently and without fanfare, that he would do everything in his power to be worthy of that trust. 6 months had passed since the day 3 small identical girls snuck into the factory. 6 months since Marcus Harrison had really looked, at the people who worked for him. That Monday morning, the factory was a different place. The same machines hummed, the same smell of new fabric and machine oil hung in the air. But something fundamental had changed. Marcus walked the factory floor without warning, something he now did regularly. Before today, his visits were rare and announced events, causing tension and anxiety. Now, his presence was met with smiles and nods. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," a seamstress greeted him without interrupting her work. "Good morning, Mrs. Jones," he replied, remembering her name. "How's that problem with your machine?" "Much better, sir. Maintenance came the same day. I couldn't believe it." Marcus smiled. "Small changes, big differences. The new policy of preventive maintenance and immediate response to machine problems had reduced downtime and, more importantly, the operator's stress." Continuing his way, he paused briefly at the new break area that had been created. What was once just a cramped corner with a few hard chairs was now a comfortable area with sofas, a small library, and even some plants. A group of employees enjoyed their 15-minute break, another change implemented in recent months. "Mr. Marcus," a familiar voice called out. Laura was sitting with some colleagues, a book open on her lap. "I didn't know you were coming today." "Last-minute decision," he replied, approaching the group. The other women, who would have been tense with the CEO's presence before, simply smiled and continued their conversation. "We're discussing ideas for the new uniform," Laura explained, showing some designs on the paper in front of her. "Since you asked for suggestions, and you have many from what I see," Marcus observed, genuinely interested. One of the women, whom Marcus recognized as Mrs. Davies, Laura's friend, showed a simple but elegant design. "This model would be more comfortable for those who work sitting all day," she explained, "and different colors could identify the different sectors." "I like that," Marcus replied, genuinely impressed. "I'll take that idea to the design department." "Seriously?" Selma asked in surprised. "I thought you were just asking for our opinion out of formality." Marcus shook his head. "Not anymore. Who better to decide on uniforms than the people who wear them every day?" The brief break ended, and the employees returned to their posts. but without the anxious rush of before. There was a more humane rhythm now, a dignity that Marcus perceived more and more clearly. In the packing section, he stopped to chat with an older man who was carefully folding finished pieces. "Mr. Green, how is your grandson?" he asked, remembering their conversation from the previous week. The man, who would have barely dared to look the CEO in the eye before, smiled broadly. "Much better, Mr. Marcus. That specialist recommendation the HR department gave us, it made all the difference. The boy is already going back to school." "Excellent," Marcus replied, genuinely pleased. The new health assistance program for employees and their families had been one of the most significant changes and, surprisingly, one of the most cost-effective. Employees who didn't have to constantly worry about their families' health were more present, more focused, and happier employees. Continuing his walk, Marcus noticed a young woman who seemed new to the company. She worked carefully, but still without the speed of more experienced employees. "Hello," he greeted, stopping beside her. "I'm Marcus Harrison." The young woman looked up, nervous. I know who you are. I'm Isabella. I started last week." "How has your experience been so far?" he asked, genuinely interested. Isabella seemed surprised by the question. "It's been good. Better than I expected, actually. My cousin worked here 2 years ago and said it was very different." "Different how?" "Well, she said it was stressful, that no one had time to teach anything, that supervisors would yell if you made mistakes." Isabella hesitated. "But it's not like that, Mrs. Kelly, who works over there," she pointed to a more experienced employee, "has been patiently teaching me everything. And Mr. Paul, our supervisor, checks my progress without pressure." Marcus nodded, satisfied. The new mentorship program, where experienced employees received a small bonus for training newcomers, was working as expected. "And what do you think we could improve even further?" he asked, surprising the young woman again. I can suggest things." "Of course. Who better to identify problems than those directly involved in the work?" Isabella thought for a moment. "Well, I think the rotation system for the cutting tables could be more efficient. Sometimes we're waiting for material while other areas are overloaded." Marcus pulled a small notebook from his pocket and wrote down the observation. "I'll check that with the logistics team." "Thank you, Isabella." The surprise on the young woman's face at seeing the CEO of the company noting her suggestion was visible. But there was something else there, a sparkle of recognition, of appreciation. In the supervisor's office, Marcus found Thompson, the formerly authoritarian supervisor. The man had changed too, not by his own choice initially, but eventually adapting to the new company culture. "Mr. Harrison," Thompson greeted him, "I was reviewing the numbers for the new flexible production system. We're 7% above initial projections, and the rework rate reduced by almost 40%, Thompson replied, a slight tone of surprise still present in his voice, even months after the implementation of the changes. "I still don't completely understand how we produce more by giving employees more breaks." Marcus smiled. "People are not machines, Thompson. When we respect their limits, they surprise us with their capacity." In the canteen during lunch break, Marcus did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months prior. He served himself the same lunch as the employees and sat at a common table. Gradually, employees joined him, not out of obligation or fear, but out of genuine interest in talking. They discussed new products, suggested improvements to the workflow, and even joked about how the canteen food had drastically improved. They finally discovered what salt is. A particularly touching moment occurred when an older employee timidly approached him. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "I just wanted to thank you for the new retirement plan. I've worked here for 22 years, and I never thought I could retire with dignity." Marcus shook her hand with respect. "We thank you for your years of dedication, Mrs. Adams. 22 years is a lifetime of contribution." Later, as he walked back to his office, Marcus encountered Sophia, the employee who had helped the triplets on that fateful day. "Mr. Marcus," she greeted him with a smile. "Laura told me you're going to the girls' match recital on Friday." "Wouldn't miss it for anything," he replied, smiling at the thought of the triplets incessantly rehearsing their school presentation. It's good to see the boss caring about an employee's life, Sophia commented. Then, with a more serious look, she added, "It makes all the difference, you know, not just for Laura and the girls, but for all of us, to see that we are more than just numbers." Marcus nodded, understanding deeply what she meant. "You were never just numbers," he replied. "So I was just too blind to see." Back in his office, Marcus looked out the window at the factory floor below. He saw the same faces that had always been there, doing the same jobs they had always done. The difference was that now he knew them, their names, their stories, their hopes. Sophia, his assistant, came in with some documents. "The final quarterly reports, Mr. Harrison Fonchi announced. Operating profit above expectations. Employee turnover reduced by 60%, productivity up. The board is impressed." "Thank you, Sophia," he replied, taking the papers. "Oh, and could you call the HR department? I want to implement that idea about the scholarship program for employees' children." "Immediately," she replied, making a note. Before leaving, she added, "You know, Mr. Harrison, I've worked with you for 8 years and I've never seen you so present." Marcus smiled. "I guess I finally learned to see Sophia." When she left, Marcus picked up the picture frame on his desk, Ella's drawing with the 4 stick figures and the large red heart. Beside it, there was now a photo, Marcus with Laura and the triplets on a picnic in the park, all smiling under the golden sunlight. The factory continued to run below, producing the same clothes as always, but now it was a place where people were seen, heard, and valued. A place where the CEO was not a distant, feared figure, but someone who remembered to ask about sick grandchildren and who wrote down suggestions from newcomers. Marcus Harrison had come to be seen because he had finally learned to see. The rain fell gently that Friday, turning the streets into wet mirrors that reflected the city lights. Marcus drove slowly, the windshield occasionally fogging despite the air conditioning. In the passenger seat was a bouquet of simple flowers and a bag with a bottle of grape juice, his contribution to dinner. Visits to Laura and the triplets' home had become a fixed point in his life, an anchor amidst the meetings, reports, and decisions that made up his days. But today was different. Today was not just another casual visit. It was a special dinner to celebrate Laura's birthday. He parked on the familiar street, picked up the gifts, and stepped out into the light rain, feeling the fresh drops on his face. The modest building no longer seemed strange or unsuitable to him, as it had the first time. Now climbing those creaking stairs brought a comforting sense of familiarity. Even before knocking, he heard the lively chatter from the other side of the door. He knocked twice, gently, as he always did. The door opened immediately, revealing 3 identical faces looking up with radiant smiles. "Mr. Marcus!" the triplets exclaimed in unison. The formalities had been gradually abandoned. He was no longer Mr. Harrison, just Mr. Marcus, a title they insisted on keeping despite his protests that they could just call him Marcus. "Happy birthday for Mommy," Lily said, pulling him by the hand inside. "We made a cake," Grace informed, proudly pointing to the kitchen. "And we decorated everything ourselves," Ella added, always the quietest but with eyes shining with pride. The small apartment was, in fact, decorated. Colorful balloons floated on the ceiling. Crepe paper streamers crisscrossed the walls, and on the living room table, now covered with a tablecloth Marcus recognized as new, there was a small homemade cake, decorated with uneven frosting, clearly made by childish hands. "You girls did an amazing job," Marcus praised, genuinely impressed. "Mrs. Jenkins helped with the cake," Grace explained, always honest, "but the decorating was all ours." Laura appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She wore a simple but pretty blouse that Marcus didn't remember seeing before, and her hair was down, framing her face in a way that made him hesitate for a moment. "Hi," she said simply, with a shy smile. "Happy birthday," Marcus replied, extending the bouquet of flowers. Nothing extravagant, just daisies and a few lilies, but chosen with care, remembering she had once mentioned liking white flowers. "They're beautiful," Laura thanked him, accepting the flowers with a look that said more than her words. "I'll put them in water." The triplets soon dragged him around to show all the decorating details, excitedly explaining how they had saved their allowance money, a small amount Laura set aside for them each month, to buy the balloons and crepe paper. "And we made cards too," Ella said, showing 3 colorful cards carefully positioned next to the cake. The kitchen table had been moved to the living room, as the kitchen was too small to accommodate 5 people. It was a simple, square table, clearly designed for 4 people at most. With 5 chairs now squeezed around it, 2 of them clearly borrowed, different from the others, it looked almost comical. "And I hope you don't mind us being a bit cramped," Laura said, returning from the kitchen with the flowers now in a makeshift vase, an old glass jar decorated with a ribbon. "Not at all," Marcus replied honestly. In his own home, he had a dining table for 12 people, where he usually ate alone on the rare occasions he wasn't dining at the office or in business restaurants. The smell of homemade food filled the air, something that reminded him of lasagna, but with a different aroma he couldn't identify. "It's Grandma's recipe," Lily explained, noticing his interest. "Lasagna with special sauce." "White and red sauce," Grace added, as if that explained everything. "It's a birthday tradition," Ella completed. "Mommy always makes it for her birthday and ours." Marcus smiled at the seriousness with which they treated these small family traditions, simple things that created structure and meaning in their lives. Laura served the meal, lasagna, salad, and homemade bread. It was a tight table, elbows occasionally touching, plates almost brushing against each other. But there was something about that closeness that wasn't uncomfortable. It was intimate, welcoming. The triplets dominated the initial conversation, telling stories from school, elaborately explaining how they had kept the surprise decoration a secret and occasionally interrupting each other with corrections or important additions. Marcus watched the interaction, fascinated by the dynamic between them, how they knew exactly when it was each one's turn to speak, how they completed each other's sentences, how they shared glances that seemed to contain entire conversations. "And Mr. Marcus helped us with the gift idea," Lily said at one point, prompting censorious looks from her sisters. "Son, it was a surprise," Grace whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oops," Lily replied, covering her mouth with her hand. Laura looked at Marcus with curiosity. "Gift?" Marcus smiled enigmatically. After dinner, the food was delicious, simple but prepared with care. Marcus realized he rarely remembered the taste of meals he ate in expensive restaurants. But he knew he would remember this one. When the plates were cleared, the girls insisted it was cake time, but first Laura had to open the presents. They went first, handing over their handmade cards and a small joint package. "We saved up together," Grace explained. Laura carefully opened the package, revealing a small bottle of perfume. Nothing luxurious, but Marcus realized from the look on her face that it was something she had wanted for a while. "It's just like the one you tried at that store at the mall," Ella said. "You said it was very pretty." Laura hugged all 3 together, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's perfect. Thank you, my little ones." Then it was Marcus's turn. He pulled a small box from his pocket, handing it to Laura with a hesitant smile. "The girls helped me choose," he explained. "Or rather, they told me what you always look at in store windows." Laura opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant watch, with a brown leather strap and a classic dial. "Marcus," she began, clearly moved. "It's beautiful, but you shouldn't have." "Please," he said simply. "You always check the time on your phone and say you'll buy a real watch someday." Laura smiled, understanding that he really paid attention to the small details. She put the watch on her wrist, where it fit perfectly. Then came the cake, with its bright candles and imperfect but loving decoration. They sang Happy Birthday, Marcus feeling strangely emotional as he joined his voice with the triplets in the simple song. Afterwards, with the cake served on small plates, the conversation flowed naturally, moving from trivial topics to dreams and hopes. The girls talked about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Lily wanted to be a veterinarian, Grace thought about being a teacher, and Ella, always the artist, dreamed of drawing beautiful things that make people happy. Eventually, it was time for the girls to go to bed. They protested, as always, but the promise that Marcus would read a story before bed smoothed the transition. Sitting on the edge of Ella's bed, with the 3 girls settled in their respective beds, but all attentive to the story, Marcus read about transformed princes, distant kingdoms, and happy endings. His voice, which commanded boardrooms and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, now softened to create magical worlds for 3 sleepy-eyed girls. When the story ended and the lights were off, Marcus returned to the living room to find Laura cleaning up the last traces of the party. Without saying anything, he picked up a cloth and began to help. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, until everything was clean and tidy. Then they sat on the small sofa, the apartment now quiet except for the soft sound of rain against the windows. "Thank you," Laura finally said. "For everything, the gift, the help with the girls, for being here." Marcus looked at her, realizing how easy it was to be there, in that small apartment with its cramped table and thin walls. How natural it felt to sit on that worn sofa and feel that he was exactly where he should be. "You know," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I come here thinking I'm helping you somehow, bringing a little joy into your lives." He paused, looking at his own hands. "But the truth is, I found something here that I never had before." Laura waited, giving him space to continue. "Peace," he said simply. Sitting at that cramped table, with elbows touching and laughter all around, "I found a peace I've never experienced in my entire life." Laura smiled, a soft smile that lit up her eyes. Without saying anything, she reached out and took his hand. They stayed like that for a long moment, just existing together in the comfortable silence of the apartment, the sound of the rain creating a protective barrier between them and the outside world. At that small table, Marcus Harrison had found something infinitely greater than anything his money and power could ever buy. He had found a place to belong. 1 year, 365 days since 3 small girls snuck into a factory, determined to save their sick mother's job. 1 year since Marcus Harrison saw for the first time the people behind the numbers. In his penthouse office, Marcus watched the factory below. The morning sun illuminated the complex, so different now from the grey place it had been. The new garden between the buildings bloomed with spring flowers. The bicycle parking, a suggestion from a young employee, was full. And for the first time, there was no line of people waiting to hand in their resignation. Marcus turned to his organized desk. In the center, simply framed, was still the drawing Ella had made, 4 stick figures holding hands, surrounded by a red heart. Beside it, there were now photos: Marcus, Laura, and the triplets on a picnic, another from the company's Christmas party, where the girls had charmed everyone with their energy. Sophia, his assistant, entered with a folder. "The final year-end reports, Mr. Harrison. The board is impressed. No one expected these results when you started the changes." Marcus already knew the numbers. Productivity increased by 22%. Turnover reduced from 40% to less than 8%. Quality so superior that rework costs fell by half. "Looks like treating people as human beings is good business after all," he commented, smiling. "Who would have thought?" Sophia replied. "Oh, Laura confirmed Sunday dinner and reminded me it's your turn to bring dessert." "Thanks. Can you cancel my last meeting today? I promised the girls I'd watch their school presentation." "Already done," she confirmed before leaving. Marcus walked to the window, his gaze drawn to the area where Laura's machine was located. She still worked there, now with flexible hours that allowed her to pick up the girls from school. She had refused his offer of an administrative position. She liked to sew, she just didn't like being treated like a machine. The factory was transformed. The same walls, the same roof, but a completely different spirit. People chatted while they worked. Laughter could be heard. Supervisors helped instead of just demanding. And music played softly in some sectors, creating a lighter atmosphere. Small changes that, together, completely transformed the place. The phone rang. "Mr. Harrison, the documents for the new company structure are ready. Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely," he replied without hesitation. "Converting to a shared ownership model is the next logical step. Employees deserve to own a part of what they build." After hanging up, Marcus picked up the picture frame with Ella's drawing. His fingers traced the outline of the red heart. Now there was a 5th figure in that makeshift family, though the drawing hadn't been updated yet. Who could have imagined that 3 girls trying to operate a sewing machine would change everything? Not just the factory or the company, but Marcus's own life. Before too, his world was defined by acquisitions, mergers, profits. Now, it was measured in Sunday dinners, bedtime stories, cherished drawings, and Laura's smile when he held her hand. As evening approached, Marcus closed his computer. There was a school presentation to attend. In the elevator, he met Thompson, the formerly authoritarian supervisor who, surprisingly, had adapted well to the changes. "On your way to the Triplets school?" he asked, more relaxed than a year ago. "Presentation on the solar system," Marcus confirmed. "Those girls are special. They changed everything around here, didn't they?" Marcus smiled. "Yes, they are." And yes, they did. As he left, he waved to employees who were also ending their day. He knew most of them by name now. He knew about their children, their dreams, their difficulties. They were people, not resources. In the car, on the way to the school where 3 identical girls eagerly awaited him, Marcus reflected on the irony. He had spent his life accumulating wealth and power, only to discover that true value lay in a child's smile, a single mother's trust, the warmth of a dining table too small for 5 people. The drawing on his desk said it all. 3 girls and a mother had shown him what true value is, and Marcus Harrison would never be the same. The change had happened quietly, without grand announcements. Just a man who had learned to see people as people. A CEO who had discovered that empathy wasn't just a word for social responsibility reports, but the foundation of everything that mattered. And as he drove towards the school, with flowers for 3 little solar system stars, Marcus smiled. Sometimes, the biggest transformations begin with the simplest gestures. Like the love of 3 girls for their mother, strong enough to change a man, a company, and perhaps, a little bit, the world. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones.